Some people ask me how I knew it was time to walk away. They expect a dramatic story, a single moment of revelation. But the truth is, it wasn't one thing. It was 1,000 small cuts, each one deeper than the last, until I finally looked down and realized I was bleeding out. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there from the beginning, scattered like breadcrumbs along a path I was too eager to follow. When I first met David's family 3 years ago, I was captivated by their closeness. Coming from a broken home where my parents had divorced when I was 12, and communication happened through terse text messages, the Hartwell family dynamic seemed like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. David's mother, Patricia, would insist everyone gather for Sunday dinners. His father, Robert, told stories about his construction business while carving the roast. His younger sister, Emma, would roll her eyes at their parents' quirks but smile when she thought no one was looking. What I mistook for warmth, however, was actually control wrapped in the guise of tradition. Patricia didn't invite me to family dinners. She commanded my presence. "Sarah will be joining us this Sunday, won't you, dear?" she would say, never actually waiting for my response. When I tried to politely decline once, explaining that I had plans with my college friends, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. David later told me his mother had spent the entire dinner asking what was wrong with me, whether I thought I was too good for his family, and if this was how I planned to treat them once we were married. We had been dating for 6 months at that point, and while I loved David deeply, marriage felt like a distant concept, something that belonged to the future version of ourselves. But in the Hartwell household, our relationship had already been mapped out, planned, and scheduled like everything else in their lives. Patricia had opinions about when we should get engaged, where we should live, how many children we should have, and what I should do with my marketing degree. According to her, working women were fine until they became mothers, at which point their primary responsibility was to the family. I tried to laugh off these comments initially, chalking them up to generational differences. My own mother had worked full-time throughout my childhood, and while our family had its problems, her career had never been one of them. But David would squeeze my hand under the dinner table whenever his mother made these pronouncements, his grip tight enough to leave marks. Later, when we were alone, he would defend her. "She means well, Sarah. This is just how she shows she cares. She wants you to feel included in the family." Included felt like a generous word for what was happening. What I experienced was more like being slowly absorbed, my individual identity dissolving into the collective Hartwell consciousness. When David and I moved in together after dating for a year, Patricia insisted on helping us decorate our apartment. She arrived with boxes of family heirlooms, photographs, and furniture that had been in the family for generations. Our small 2-bedroom space quickly filled with heavy wooden furniture that smelled like mothballs and doilies that caught dust faster than I could clean them. "This is beautiful," I said, running my fingers along an ornate china cabinet that took up most of our dining area. "But it's pretty formal for our place, don't you think?" Patricia's smile could have frozen water. "This belonged to David's great-grandmother. It's a family piece. I assumed you would want to honor family traditions." The word assumed carried weight in Patricia's vocabulary. She assumed I would quit my job when David and I got engaged. She assumed we would have our wedding reception at the country club where she was a member. She assumed I would take the Hartwell name and embrace the Hartwell way of doing everything. Each assumption felt like a small cage being built around me, bar by bar, until I could barely move without bumping into her expectations. David proposed on a crisp October evening during a family dinner, just as Patricia had predicted he would. The ring was his grandmother's, a family heirloom that Patricia had been saving for the right girl. As David knelt beside my chair in the formal dining room, surrounded by his entire family, I felt the walls closing in. Everyone was watching, waiting, expecting me to burst into tears of joy, and immediately start planning the wedding Patricia had already begun designing in her head. I said yes because saying no felt impossible in that moment, with all their hopeful faces turned toward me like flowers following the Sunday. But even as David slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt a strange disconnect, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. The diamond was beautiful but too big for my small hands. The setting was ornate and old-fashioned, nothing like the simple, modern designs I had admired in jewelry store windows. When I looked at it later that night, alone in our bathroom, it felt like wearing someone else's identity. The wedding planning began immediately, with Patricia leading the charge like a general preparing for battle. She had opinions about everything: the venue, the flowers, the dress, the guest list, the menu, the music. When I suggested having the ceremony at the Botanical Gardens where David and I had spent many happy afternoons, Patricia wrinkled her nose as if I had suggested getting married in a barn. "The Hartwell men have been married at Street Matthews for 3 generations, dear. Tradition is important." I found myself agreeing to decisions I didn't want, wearing a dress I didn't love, planning a reception that felt more like Patricia's social event than our celebration. When my maid of honor, Jessica, pointed out that I seemed stressed about the wedding details, I brushed off her concerns. "All brides feel overwhelmed," I told her, though deep down I wondered if other brides felt like strangers at their own weddings. The financial aspect of our relationship became another source of tension, though it developed so gradually I didn't recognize it as manipulation until much later. David made significantly more money than I did, working as a financial advisor while I was building my career in marketing. Initially, he insisted on paying for most of our shared expenses, brushing off my attempts to contribute equally. "I make more, so I should pay more," he would say. And it seemed logical, even generous. But generosity, I learned, often came with strings attached in the Hartwell family. When I wanted to spend money on things David or his family didn't approve of, suddenly my financial contributions mattered very much. I had been working with a personal trainer twice a week, something that made me feel strong and confident, but Patricia commented that it seemed excessive for someone planning a wedding. David agreed, suggesting I could get plenty of exercise by taking walks in our neighborhood. When I protested that the training sessions were important to me, David pointed out that the money could be better spent on our future together. "You're not really contributing equally to our savings anyway," he said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than cruel. "Maybe it makes sense for me to have more input on how we spend discretionary income." I stopped seeing the trainer, telling myself it was a reasonable compromise. After all, David was right about our financial disparity, and we were saving for a house, a future, a life together. But losing that 1 hour twice a week where I felt completely myself, where I could push my body and clear my mind, left a hole that I struggled to fill. The pattern repeated itself with other small expenditures. Coffee dates with friends became unnecessary socializing. Books I wanted to read were frivolous purchases. Even the organic groceries I preferred were deemed pretentious, compared to the regular brands Patricia had always bought. Each individual decision seemed minor, but collectively they added up to a life that felt increasingly foreign to me. After we married, the dynamic shifted again. Patricia now felt entitled to even more input in our lives, calling our house the family home and dropping by unannounced to check on us. She had strong opinions about how I should be maintaining the house, what I should be cooking for dinner, and how I should be spending my time. When I worked late on an important marketing campaign, she would comment to David about wives who prioritized their careers over their families. When I suggested we spend Christmas at my mother's house for once, Patricia acted as if I had suggested we celebrate the holiday in prison. "We've always had Christmas here," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that made disagreement feel like betrayal. "David's grandfather started this tradition. Are you saying you want to break a 50-year tradition?" I wasn't saying that, exactly, but I was saying that I wanted to feel like I had a choice in how we spent our holidays, our weekends, our lives. David would listen to my concerns with what seemed like genuine sympathy, nodding and making understanding noises, but ultimately he would find reasons why changing the status quo wasn't practical or advisable. "We can visit your mom another time," he would say. "You know how much family tradition means to my parents. Let's just keep the peace this year, and we'll figure something else out later." Later never came. Peace, I discovered, required my constant surrender. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday in March, 18 months after our wedding. I had been working on a major campaign for a client who was launching a sustainable fashion line, something I felt passionate about both professionally and personally. The project required several late nights and weekend work sessions, but I was proud of the creative direction and excited about the potential impact. The client loved the initial concepts, and my boss had hinted that success on this campaign could lead to a promotion. That Tuesday evening, I came home exhausted but energized, ready to share my excitement about the client's positive feedback with David. Instead, I found him and Patricia sitting in our living room, surrounded by real estate listings and mortgage applications. They looked up as I entered, and Patricia's expression was a mixture of excitement and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Perfect timing," David said, standing to kiss my cheek. "We found the house." I set down my bag slowly, confusion clouding my thoughts. "What house?" Patricia beamed, spreading the listings across our coffee table like a winning poker hand. "The Henderson place on Maple Street. It's been in their family for 40 years, but they're ready to downsize. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, beautiful, mature trees, and the most wonderful sunroom. It's exactly what you two need to start your family properly." The phrase, "start your family properly," hit me like cold water. David and I had discussed children in abstract terms, agreeing that we wanted them someday, but never setting a timeline or making concrete plans. Certainly, we had never discussed needing a 5-bedroom house to accommodate these hypothetical future children. "I don't understand," I said, looking from Patricia to David and back again. "When did you look at this house? Why wasn't I included in this conversation?" David had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "My mom mentioned it yesterday, and the market is so competitive right now. I wanted to get a sense of the numbers before getting your hopes up, but the preliminary approval looks good. We could make an offer this week." I picked up one of the listings, noting the price with a sinking heart. The house cost nearly twice what we had discussed as our budget, and the down payment alone would drain our savings completely. More than that, it was located in Patricia's neighborhood, just 3 blocks from the house where David had grown up. This is way more than we talked about spending, I said carefully. And it's so far from my office. The commute would be at least an hour each way. Patricia waved dismissively. Oh, sweetheart, you won't need to worry about commuting much longer. David's salary can easily support this house payment, and once you start having babies, you'll want to be closer to family anyway. I'll be able to help with babysitting, and you'll have the neighborhood support system I've built over the years. The assumption hung in the air like smoke. Patricia had decided I would be quitting my job, having babies, and moving into her neighborhood, all without consulting me. David, who knew how much my career meant to me, who had listened to me talk about my professional goals countless times, was nodding along as if this plan made perfect sense. I'm not ready to quit my job, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I just started this campaign, and I love what I do. We've never discussed me stopping work. David's expression shifted, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before: annoyance. Not with his mother's presumptions, but with my resistance to them. We've talked about prioritizing family when the time comes, he said. I thought you understood that. And Sarah, let's be realistic about your salary. Even with a promotion, you're not making enough to justify the childcare costs and the stress of juggling everything. This house is an investment in our future. I felt as if the floor had tilted beneath my feet. When had we talked about me prioritizing family over career? When had I agreed to any of this? I tried to remember our conversations about the future, but they seemed hazy now, filtered through the lens of what I was beginning to realize had been careful manipulation. I need to think about this, I said, standing abruptly. This is a huge decision, and I need time to process everything. Patricia's smile faltered for the first time. Well, of course, dear, but you can't think too long. The Hendersons have already had 2 other families express interest. Sometimes you have to trust that the universe is aligning things for a reason. That night, David and I had our first real fight as a married couple. He couldn't understand why I wasn't excited about the house, why I was being difficult about what seemed like a natural next step. I tried to explain that I felt blindsided, that major life decisions should be made together, that I had never agreed to give up my career or move to his mother's neighborhood. You're being dramatic, he said, his tone taking on the same dismissive quality I had heard Patricia use countless times. No one is forcing you to do anything. But marriages require compromise, Sarah. My family has been nothing but welcoming to you, and this house represents stability and tradition. I thought you valued those things too. The argument ended in stalemate, with both of us sleeping on opposite sides of our bed, a chasm of unspoken resentment between us. But I couldn't stop thinking about David's words. When had compromise become synonymous with surrender? When had I stopped having a voice in my own life? The next morning brought clarity in the form of my phone ringing at 6 a.m. It was my boss, calling to tell me that our sustainable fashion client wanted to fast-track the campaign launch and had specifically requested that I lead a presentation to their board of directors next week. It was the kind of opportunity I had been working toward for years, a chance to showcase my skills on a major stage and potentially land the promotion I had been hoping for. I was explaining the exciting development to David over breakfast when Patricia arrived, unannounced as usual, carrying coffee and pastries from the bakery near her house. She had developed a habit of dropping by in the mornings, ostensibly to check on us, but really to involve herself in our daily decisions. What's all this excitement about? She asked, settling herself at our kitchen table as if she lived there. David explained about my work opportunity, and I waited for Patricia's response, hoping for once she might show some enthusiasm for my professional success. Instead, her face fell. Oh, sweetheart, she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. That's such bad timing. The Hendersons need an answer about the house by Friday, and you know how important it is to move quickly in this market. How can you focus on house hunting and mortgage applications when you're distracted by work projects? I stared at her, feeling a familiar surge of frustration. I'm not distracted by work. This is my career. This opportunity could change everything for me professionally. Patricia's expression became sympathetic in a way that felt condescending. I understand that work can feel important, dear, but you have to think about the bigger picture. Houses like this don't come available often, and David has worked so hard to put you both in a position to afford it. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good of the family. The word sacrifices echoed in my head long after Patricia left that morning. I realized with sudden, sharp clarity that every sacrifice in our relationship had been mine. I had given up my trainer, my organic groceries, my friendships, my holiday preferences, my wedding vision, and now I was expected to give up the biggest opportunity of my career for a house I didn't want in a neighborhood that would keep me under Patricia's constant supervision. I called in sick to work that day, something I rarely did, and spent the morning driving aimlessly through the city. I found myself parked outside the apartment complex where I had lived before moving in with David, staring up at what used to be my windows. That apartment had been small and noisy, with thin walls and unreliable plumbing, but it had been mine. I had chosen the paint colors, the furniture, The decorations? I had come and gone as I pleased, spent my money how I wanted, made my own decisions about my time and priorities. When had I started believing that loving someone meant disappearing into their family's expectations? When had I confused acceptance with absorption? That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Jessica and asked if she wanted to meet for coffee. Jessica had been my closest friend since college, but our friendship had become strained since my marriage. She had tried to maintain our regular coffee dates and girls' nights. But between David's family obligations and Patricia's disapproval of my single friends, our time together had dwindled to occasional text messages and birthday cards. Jessica agreed to meet immediately, and when I saw her sitting in our old favorite coffee shop, I felt something inside my chest loosen for the first time in months. She hugged me tightly and ordered my usual drink without asking, remembering details about my preferences that I had forgotten I ever had. "You look tired," she said gently, settling into the worn leather chair across from mine. "How are you doing?" And I want the real answer, not the polite version. The question broke something open inside me, and before I knew it, I was telling Jessica everything. About the house I didn't want, the career expectations I had never agreed to, the constant feeling of shrinking to fit into spaces that weren't made for me. About Patricia's assumptions and David's dismissive responses and the growing sense that I was losing myself one compromise at a time. Jessica listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned as my story unfolded. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "Sarah," she said finally, "when was the last time you made a decision about your own life without checking with David or his mother first?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to protest, to list examples of my independence, but came up empty. Even small choices like what to eat for lunch or which route to take to work had become filtered through David's preferences or Patricia's opinions. I had been asking permission to live my own life without even realizing it. "I love David," I said weakly, as if that explained everything. "I know you do," Jessica replied, "but love shouldn't require you to disappear." The Sarah I knew in college had opinions and dreams and a backbone made of steel. Where did she go? That evening, I made a decision that felt both monumental and terrifyingly simple. I told David that I would not be making an offer on the Henderson house, and I would not be compromising my career opportunity to accommodate his mother's timeline. I expected anger, argument, maybe even an ultimatum. Instead, David looked at me with genuine confusion, as if I were speaking a foreign language. "I don't understand why you're making this so complicated," he said. "We've been planning this for months. My mom has already told the Hendersons we're interested. What am I supposed to tell her?" The question revealed everything I needed to know about our relationship dynamic. David wasn't worried about disappointing me. He was worried about disappointing his mother. My feelings, my career, my future were secondary to Patricia's expectations and the path she had laid out for us. "Tell her the truth," I said quietly. "Tell her that I am not ready to buy a house I can't afford in a neighborhood I don't want to live in. Tell her that I have my own career and my own priorities, and they matter too." David's face flushed red. "You're being selfish, Sarah. Marriage is about building something together, not just doing whatever you want without considering the other person." "You're right," I agreed. "Marriage should be about building something together. But what we've been building feels like Patricia's vision, not ours. When do I get a say in my own life?" The fight that followed was ugly and revealing. David accused me of being ungrateful for everything his family had done for me, of being too proud to accept help, of prioritizing my career over our marriage. I accused him of never standing up for me, of making decisions about our future without including me, of expecting me to mold myself into his mother's image of the perfect wife. We said things that couldn't be taken back, revealed resentments that had been festering for months. When David finally stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in our relationship, I had spoken my truth without softening it to make it more palatable. David spent the night at his parents' house, and I spent it making lists. Pros and cons, options and possibilities, fears and hopes. By morning, I knew what I had to do, even though the thought of it terrified me. I called my boss and accepted the board presentation opportunity enthusiastically. I called a real estate agent and asked about apartment rentals in my price range near downtown. I called Jessica and asked if I could stay with her for a few days while I sorted out my living situation. And then I sat down to write David a letter, because some conversations were too important for the heat of emotion. In the letter, I explained that I loved him but couldn't continue living in a relationship where my identity was slowly being erased. I wrote about feeling like a guest in my own life, about making compromises that felt more like capitulations, about wanting a partnership where both people had equal voices in creating their shared future. I told him I was moving out temporarily, not because I wanted our marriage to end, but because I needed space to remember who I was outside of his family's expectations. David returned the next evening to find me packing a suitcase. He read the letter while I folded clothes, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been panic. When he finished reading, he looked at me as if I were a stranger. "You can't be serious about this," he said. "You're going to throw away our marriage over a house?" "This isn't about the house, David," I replied, continuing to pack. "This is about respect and partnership and having a voice in my own life. I've been trying to tell you this for months, but you haven't been listening." What followed was the most honest conversation David and I had ever had. Without Patricia's influence or the pressure of family expectations, we were able to talk about what had gone wrong between us. David admitted that he had never questioned his mother's involvement in our relationship because her opinion had always mattered more to him than almost anything else. He acknowledged that he had assumed I would eventually come around to seeing things their way, that my resistance was temporary rather than legitimate. I told him about feeling invisible in my own marriage, about how every conversation about our future seemed to have already been decided without my input. I explained that I didn't want to be the kind of wife who existed only as an extension of her husband's family, who gave up her own dreams to fulfill someone else's vision of what her life should look like. "I don't know how to be married without my family's involvement," David said quietly. "They've always been part of every major decision I've made." "And that's something you need to figure out," I replied, "because I can't be in a marriage where I'm always going to come second to your mother's opinions." I moved in with Jessica that weekend, taking only my essential belongings and leaving behind the family heirlooms and inherited furniture that had never felt like mine anyway. The physical act of moving out was easier than I had expected. The emotional weight of it was crushing. I loved David, genuinely and deeply, but I was beginning to understand that love without respect was insufficient foundation for a life together. The first week of separation was the hardest. David called constantly, alternating between apologies and accusations, promises to change, and threats to file for divorce. Patricia called too, using every manipulation tactic in her considerable arsenal. She accused me of being ungrateful, selfish, and disloyal to the family that had welcomed me with open arms. She suggested I was having some kind of breakdown, that I needed therapy to help me understand the importance of family unity. "David is a good man from a good family," she said during one particularly painful phone call. "If you throw this away, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. There aren't many men who would be as patient with your behavior as David has been." Her words stung because they contained just enough truth to be dangerous. David was a good man in many ways. He was kind to animals and children, generous with friends, hardworking and responsible. But good men could still be suffocating partners if they never questioned the systems that taught them to expect constant accommodation from the women in their lives. I blocked Patricia's number after a week of increasingly hostile voicemails. I loved David enough to work on our marriage, but I wasn't willing to be harassed into submission by his mother. My work presentation went beautifully. The client loved the campaign concept, and my boss offered me the promotion I had been hoping for. Standing in that boardroom, delivering ideas I was passionate about to people who respected my expertise, I remembered what it felt like to take up space confidently in the world. I remembered what it felt like to be valued for my mind and my capabilities, rather than my willingness to defer to others. 3 weeks after moving out, David asked if we could meet for dinner at a restaurant that wasn't affiliated with any family memories. He looked tired and uncertain, nothing like the confident man I had married. Over pasta and wine, he told me about the conversations he had been having with a therapist, about the things he was beginning to understand about his family dynamics and his own behavior. "I never realized how controlling my mother could be until you weren't there to absorb it," he said. "She's been calling me multiple times a day, showing up at my office, trying to manage every aspect of how I handle our separation. It's exhausting." For the first time in our relationship, David was experiencing Patricia's manipulation without me as a buffer. I felt a complicated mixture of vindication and sympathy. "I told her we wouldn't be buying the Henderson house," he continued. "She didn't speak to me for 3 days. I had no idea she would react that strongly to something that should be our decision." We talked for 2 hours, sharing perspectives we had never been able to discuss when we were caught up in the daily negotiations of married life. David was beginning to understand that love and control were not the same thing, that family support should not come with conditions that required me to abandon my own identity. I was beginning to see that his deference to his mother wasn't necessarily malicious. It was learned behavior from a family system that had never taught him to question authority or consider alternative viewpoints. "What would it look like if we tried again?" he asked as we were leaving the restaurant. "Not the way things were before, but differently?" I didn't have an easy answer. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. Patterns that had been established over years wouldn't change overnight. But I could see genuine effort in David's willingness to seek therapy, in his decision to disappoint his mother rather than continue disappointing me. "It would mean establishing boundaries with your family that we both could live with," I said. "It would mean making major decisions together, as equal partners, without outside pressure. It would mean me keeping my own career and my own identity, even if your mother doesn't approve." David nodded slowly. "I think I'm finally ready to learn how to do that." We agreed to try couples counseling before making any decisions about reconciliation. The process was slow and sometimes painful, requiring both of us to examine assumptions we had never questioned. David had to learn how to prioritize our relationship over his mother's expectations, how to have difficult conversations with family members who were used to getting their way. I had to learn how to trust that change was possible, how to speak up for my needs without apologizing for having them. Patricia did not adjust gracefully to the new boundaries we established. She accused David of choosing me over his family, threatened to cut him off financially, and made several dramatic pronouncements about the destruction of family traditions. But David held firm, supported by his therapist and his growing understanding of what healthy relationships required. 6 months after our separation, David and I moved back in together. Not to the apartment filled with his family's furniture, but to a new place we chose together. We furnished it with pieces we both loved, created traditions that reflected both of our backgrounds, and established rules about family involvement that we both felt comfortable with. The process wasn't linear or easy. There were setbacks and arguments, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves, and we had to consciously choose different responses. David still struggled sometimes with disappointing his mother, and I still occasionally found myself deferring to his preferences when I should have been advocating for my own. But we were learning, together, how to build a relationship based on mutual respect rather than inherited expectations. My career flourished in ways I had never imagined possible. The promotion led to new opportunities, bigger clients, creative projects that challenged and energized me. David not only supported my professional growth but celebrated it, bragging about my achievements to anyone who would listen. When I won a regional marketing award 6 months later, he was in the front row of the ceremony, beaming with pride. We moved to a house we chose together, in a neighborhood that split the difference between our respective preferences. It was smaller than the Henderson place Patricia had wanted us to buy, but it was ours in a way that felt authentic and intentional. We planted a garden in the backyard, painted the walls colors we both loved, and created a home that reflected who we were as individuals and as a couple. Patricia and I never developed a warm relationship, but we learned to coexist respectfully. She attended family dinners with civil conversation rather than pointed criticism, and I participated in family traditions without feeling like I was losing myself in the process. David's relationship with his mother evolved too, becoming more honest and boundaried than it had ever been. 2 years later, when we decided we were ready to start trying for children, it was a decision we made together, at our own pace, based on our own timeline. We talked about how we wanted to raise them, what values we wanted to instill, and how we would navigate the inevitable challenges of extended family involvement. We were prepared this time to be intentional about creating the family culture we wanted, rather than simply inheriting the one we had been born into. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how different my life might have been if I had never found the courage to walk away from a situation that was slowly suffocating me. The breaking point, when it finally came, felt inevitable in retrospect, but at the time it required every ounce of strength I possessed to choose my own well-being over the path of least resistance. I learned that love without respect is not sustainable, that compromise should be mutual rather than unidirectional, and that family traditions are only valuable if they honor the dignity of everyone involved. I learned that it's possible to change deeply ingrained patterns of behavior, but only when both partners are committed to doing the difficult work of growth and self-examination. Most importantly, I learned that I was strong enough to walk away from a life that didn't fit me, even when that life looked perfect from the outside. Sometimes the greatest act of love, for yourself and for others, is refusing to accept less than what you deserve. Sometimes you have to break something before you can build it back better. The woman I am now would never allow herself to disappear into someone else's expectations the way I did during those first years with David. I know my own worth, trust my own judgment, and refuse to apologize for taking up space in my own life. It took walking away to remember who I was, but it was worth every difficult moment to find my way back to myself and then choose, consciously and intentionally, to build something new.